I'm assuming when we get dog points for not having rules sheet.
I learned about 6
This meeting is being recorded.
Oh my.
By the way, the meeting's being recorded. Okay, can everybody hear him?
Can you?
Y'all can move closer. Except for Gage, he's sick.
Guys, it's gonna be like right up. Well, I'm just trying to work with what we got here.
Okay.
I can move my mic closer too if it helps. Probably.
Is
that better?
An iPhone adapter
Are you talking about like a
for a
lightning?
speaker?
I do in my car.
Yes.
I don't have it on me. I have it in my car.
Don't worry about it. Okay. So we'll make this work. All right. So this is Zach. Zach, why don't you tell the students a little bit about yourself?
My name is Zach Glazar. I am currently the COO or the Chief Operating Officer of a role-playing game company called Frog God Games. So I'm one of the few people in the world that actually has a full-time tabletop gaming job outside of the Wizards of the Coast. So I don't recommend it, just to say up front. I'm old enough to remember computers from when they first really came out into the mainstream. My first computer was an Apple II, but the first computer I ever used was a Commodore PET. I don't know who's oldest here besides your professor.
I know what an Apple II computer is.
All right. So you anybody know what a Commodore PET was?
I do know what that is. Yeah, that's one of the competing computers along with the Atari.
Atari 400.
The main 3 home computers at the time was the Apple II, the Atari, I can't remember the name, and the PET computer was like the big 3 ones, if I remember correctly.
The PET computer was the one they used for schools, but that was the first computer I ever used. I used that in like 1981. And it actually is it has more to do with what I do now than most would expect. My parents they used to tell me to get off the computer, quit playing Ultima, go outside because I'm never going to use any of that stuff. Take that, Mom. Here I am talking about it now. I have a full-time job now. I have meetings about dragons, right? So I'm lucky to have gotten to where I am for what I do now. But I do owe it all to 8-bit computers, and I do collect them. And I think that's what I'm here mostly to talk about, which if you have questions about the role-playing stuff, I'll be happy to answer them later. You can email me or something. But I got started in 1981 playing video games mostly because they would pretend like they were personal education computers. That's what the PET stands for, is personal education tool. But nobody cared about the personal education tool part. We all played video games, but you would not recognize them as a video game. I mean, literally, they were choose your own adventure, if then stuff. They were move a cursor, or actually a cursor on the PET, but a sprite on the older next computers. Place to place with arrow keys, or if they didn't have arrow keys, with random keys they give you. There was no standardized control methods. It was a different time. Going back and playing them. How many of you guys have a Raspberry Pi or used one? You use emulators on it? You ever tried an emulator on a Raspberry Pi?
Yeah, RetroPie is really fun.
Right. Okay, then you would have an idea. Most things before 1988 are almost unplayable on a RetroPie. Like the first consoles, like the Odyssey 1, are unplayable on a RetroPie because they're basically just a on-screen one cursor that you move around, maybe 2 depending on the controller, with overlays, right? So they can recreate the look but not the experience, which was not worth recreating for the experience. This stuff was it was real simple. It was fun because it was new, but you had to know what our alternatives were. I'm sure your professor can talk about what our alternatives were. We had 2 channels of television, maybe 3. We had that's it. No, honestly, with LCD games, you guys, I mean, I don't know if you know or familiar with those, but they're real basic. They have you look like a calculator, basically. You have images and go. And I have a few of those in my collection, but I don't care about that as much because they're super terrible. But no, we used to do a lot of our programming ourselves for games because they would let us loose in computer labs. The schools would buy computers not knowing why they wanted them. We would have a computer lab and we would go down there and we would use the computers to do I mean, literally, I remember games were like, they would list the Civil War battles and you go fight them, but there was really no game to it. This would make you memorize basically the battles of Civil War. So, but you would have the, oh, I'm going to do a frontal assault or I'm going to do artillery barrage. They were irrelevant to the actual solution of the game. It was just a matter of going through the motions, right? So we had to make our own games. And so you could buy books or get magazines at the time where, you know, you get demo discs in the 2000s and 2010s of like PC Gamer. I don't know if you guys can remember that, but you get the demo disc and now you download your demo. Demos for us were typed in games. You would spend hours typing in assembly language, which we didn't really understand, but we could copy it off a page to make a game that we would play for 5 minutes, but we would leave the computer turned on for days because we had no tape drive, right? We were at a place where to load games, they had a networked disk drive, which was its own computer that you would load the games onto, and then you know, they would load that way. But with the pets that we would take to the classrooms, because they would disconnect them and push them on a cart to the classrooms, and we had no storage media. So you got a really remote feel, even though I didn't read assembly language, you would call it poking the memory. It's the way you would access memory directly, which would never let you do now in a million years. But you would access the memory directly to make the computer do the most inane things. Like you couldn't have lowercase letters unless you did a poke code, right? You couldn't, there were only 40 characters on the screen. You could only have so many pixels at once turned on because the memory was literally the first 4K and then 16K. You can't sneeze now in kilobytes, right? Everything you do is in megabytes. A Microsoft Word file is larger than all the memory I had on any computer I owned until 1992. It was a challenge creating games in that environment. I mean, yes, I typed them in. Did I make my own? Yes. Were they worth talking about? No. But the challenge was how do you fit everything into the memory you have available for you? Because you could quickly run out of memory and get errors with, you know, minor amounts of text. Or if you tried to change the colors on the screen, you automatically lost, 12 bits. Well, that mattered. I mean, I don't know the last time I talked about a bit, like I had a bit of food, right? So you would spend a lot of time with these games, like making your own. But one of the nice things is to learn about games and gaming back then. I have a copy of it actually right now. I wish I'd brought it I have another office where I keep all my PC stuff, but it's called B1 Bomber by Avalon Hill, which is an old game company that made board games. I got the backup for it, right? It came with a cassette, but I got the backup. The backup was printed out, right? So I could retype this game, should I be so inclined, just in case it was became unavailable to me on my cassette, because the cassettes had a unique ability to get eaten or destroyed. Any of that kind of media. I mean, we'll think about it now. It's like, oh, my CD-ROM went bad. Well, after 8 years, like, you got to be kidding me, right? So cassettes were constantly a problem. So we would print out any commercial game you bought, you could almost always, until about 1983, you could print out the code. I think Ultima 1 was printable because Richard Garriott, who wrote all the Ultima games, he wrote the first 2 in BASIC, I believe, and then he wrote Ultima 3. He started in assembly language, and by Ultima 4, when he dropped out of college because they were telling him he was doing assembly language the wrong way after he sold 200,000 copies of Ultima 4, it finally became impossible to actually read those. You had to do sector readings on disks. Like you would go and take a utility program and you go onto the diskette to read all the individual sectors to look for things like character creation sections. How do I hack my character, right? You would do it that way. And that's how we learned. I mean, that's how we kind of learned where the design of the game went. And for my current job, what mattered and what I learned there was the balancing, right? So I was able to use a horrible, I mean, they weren't horrible at the time, but yeah, they were horrible computers to my boss's wife. I'm going to tell you right now that I'm going to not answer the phone because I care enough about this. But 1 second while I tell her. Because I don't want to get fired.
That's cool.
All right. So anyway, so we would go and we'd do the sector editing and we would find the balance of the games. And they were done. Like how does each individual unit work? Or you would do things like an array program, right? You could tell what an array was. You could tell when they would store data a certain way, and you could tell where you would like balance let's say a unit, right? Or an individual monster or an individual character. You could tell what that does, and you could see how it affects the game because you could edit it, right? And so that old experience doing those things, but now when I actually do the stuff that we make at my company is Dungeons and Dragons related material, printed versions. And they balance matters a ton, right? And although I'm a game designer, I've written games and I've done games. I mean, mostly what I do now is logistical stuff and business stuff, but that stuff every day matters because I review written documents. And I think back to the games I played that were good, that I would sector edit. And I think to myself, well, how does this affect, everything has a cascading effect, right? And so the things that we would do, because their games were so simple, you could change two things, and one could be the weapon power of something or one spell, right? And then that could fundamentally change the entire experience of the game. Sometimes it improved it. I mean, quality control was not that common, right? I mean, this is the era of games that were sold in Ziploc bags. A lot of games you go and you buy them for, $30 at a time, which was insane when you think about it, because it's about $100 now almost. And they were in a Ziploc bag with a floppy disk. And so quality control on them was pretty low. Like you spend $30 for a blackjack game, right? Well, no, which brings me to the next point, because they were so expensive, no one paid really any money for games. Piracy was extremely rampant in ways that I think that people today don't understand. And especially like what you talked about the Raspberry Pi. If you notice, almost all the games that you boot on them from old 8-bit systems all have the splash screen, basically, though we didn't call it that then, which was an advertisement for the group of guys who broke the copy protection and gave you their BBS number, because no internet. So you dial up long distance, which is something you don't probably know either, at 10 cents a minute to go and download these games, right? And that's how games got spread around, right? And I probably had, growing up, 80 or 100 at any one time on an Apple II powered games, but I had 3 ones that were purchased, right? It wasn't very common, though. People often talked about piracy, but no one actually lived with it, because it really was a gamble when you purchased a game. Like, there was no reviewers. Reviews came out afterwards in a magazine 2 months after they came out, and they were shills like they are now. I mean, there wasn't a lot of there weren't a lot of places to find out about this stuff. You had to rely on the back of the box. And one of the things that happened all the time was that they would have the splash screen for the game that was done in really fancy 8-bit graphics. And that was what they would show you as a screenshot, but that wasn't the actual game, right? And the game itself could be very, very simplistic. Some of the cool things, though, that are still around that I think is interesting is that, has anybody ever heard of a company called Strategic Simulations?
I've heard of that.
They made war games, but what they really made was one of the first game engines, okay? They made about 60 war games, all almost identical, because they used the very same computational engines to depict other scenarios in war. So you'd have one that was a World War III simulation, 1985, World War III. And then you have one that was a Civil War simulation. It only had to do with how they changed and tweaked the numbers. So they were able to produce, 80 titles early on. That changed as the time went on. But the one engine that they're remembered for is, we call them gold box games. And it's big in my industry because they were Dungeons and Dragons. They were the first licensing company outside of TSR that made Dungeons and Dragons role-playing games. And they made them when they called the gold box engine. And they made them for the IBM PC, the Apple II, and the Commodore 64 originally, and eventually for the Commodore Amiga, and I think Atari 8-bit. Anyway, these gold box games use the same type of engine that they used the Dungeons and Dragons rules, and they did a pretty good job. I mean, to be honest with you, at the time, because Dungeons and Dragons rules were not written for a computer game, and it was obvious. They were written for someone to, look at the rules and make a lot of interpretations on the fly, which is why we still play Dungeons and Dragons and we don't play gold box Cool Radiance, because you're able to have an experience you still can't recreate on a computer very well, right? You can, and it's getting closer all the time. And I've been reading a lot about this new AI stuff that I think is going to make me irrelevant, but luckily after I'm retired. They took these rules that were made to have a referee, basically, the DM, a dungeon master, that to interpret them, and they put them like a video game where the interpreter was the code, right? And so once they kind of did it, and they did a good job. The content was written by the guys who wrote Dungeons and Dragons, guys that your professor and I both know. The actual game mechanics were written by the guys at Strategic Simulations, and then they released, I want to say 18, and you can fact check me because there's probably more games based on this engine. And that was before Doom, before Wolfenstein 3D, before all these games that we recognize now as having an engine, Skyrim, you get Doom, Unreal, anything in Unity, right? All those things, they were inventing this stuff, and they were doing a pretty good job considering they were working within 64 kilobytes of memory, right? And so I collect these things now, and I actually play them. Do I play them a lot? No. I mean, I will play with them, I think is a better way to put it. I played through like Ultima 4, which was Richard Garriott's first interesting, I think, RPG that was written because it had moral choices in it in a way that was fundamentally affected the entire gameplay, and it was interesting. And there's you can find discussions of that everywhere, but the point being, modern games are a lot of fun. Modern games are complicated, they're complex, they have budgets of $300 million. I don't know what it costs to make Skyrim. Elder Scrolls 6 is coming before I'm dead, I hope. But when it comes out, I'm going to bet that budget's going to beat most Hollywood movies, right? Nobody thought that was possible when we first started playing these games. It was a fad. I don't know if you guys talk about the history of games at all, but in 1982 and 83, video games were over. The market totally collapsed. And when I was there when it collapsed, and I remember being excited about it because that meant Atari 2600 cartridges were $3 each, which was more appropriate price for most of them, to be honest with you. But when that ended in 1983 at Christmas, there were no video games like in the Sears catalog, which is how we saw what was new. It was the consumer. It was the consumer kind of like guide of what was coming out, right? Sears and Roebuck had been around forever. They made a Christmas catalog called a wish book. Everything was in there. Well, all of a sudden, there were no video games, or there were a few handheld LCD ones that were still in stock, right? That stuff was over because what had happened was they had reached the limits of what these computers could do, but they didn't know a thing about what they shouldn't do. See, a lot of games that were broken, a lot of games that were so simplistic, they were just not any fun. And the Purina Dog Company, they make dog food, right? They made a Atari 2600 game in 1982. All right. I own it. I'm proud of it. The movie Porky's, which was a rated R movie based on scintillating sexual content that was not pornography, but it was not, wasn't the kind of thing you'd show in a classroom, right? They had a Atari 2600 cartridge. The Kool-Aid Man, I don't even know if he's around anymore. He had a cartridge, right? These were just terrible games across the board. And I own them because I think they're funny as hell. The show MASH about a military surgical hospital with, clever quips. It had a video game. So this just all died completely. I mean, there was even the computers that were still around, because this is a time when the IBM PC had just come out and they were doing a lot of things inside of businesses with Lotus 123 and various other corporate suites that you would recognize. Spreadsheets were just invented, for example. They were new. They were 4 years old, I think, at the max. And they were changing the way the 1980s worked fundamentally for the stock market and businesses, because middle managers were able to do things they used to have to send away for. Anyway, so no one had, video games were over, man. We were all playing laser tag. But the next year, I think it was it probably is December 83, but before it hit the catalogs or was well known, a little company called Nintendo showed up at the New York Toy Fair. And they were deciding to sell what they called the Nintendo Entertainment System, and they called it that because they did not want to call it a video game, right? And so at that point, it was kind of reset, and the entire, really the gaming from the United States to Japan. Most new games that sold a lot of copies came out of Japan. Like no consoles out of the United States were, I mean, Atari made a 5200, they made a 7800, they made a Jaguar. Nobody cared, right? I mean, they're fun. I think they've got cool games on them, et cetera, et cetera. But so you see a real shift to where console gaming goes over to Japan, but a lot of it due to the nature of the Japanese language, a lot of the games that you play on computers still, they came back, Nintendo, they kind of slunk back in. I think that you would see 1985, I think Ultima 4 came out and some other ones. And I want to say 86 was when the Bullbox games. But anyway, role-playing games and games that were heavy on text came out in the United States because it was very hard to put kanji into a computer in the 8 and 16. The 8-bit era, I don't know if they can't remember if they did. I think they did, but it was very graphically oriented in the worst kind of way. But I think with the 16-bit computers that started showing up, but I don't remember actually seeing good Japanese like role-playing games that were available on a PC until the early 90s. I mean, other than that, I collect these systems. I have 14 different systems that I have. I have an original IBM PC, which was MS-DOS based games were a whole different thing. I have an Apple II. I use a fake drive that reads an SD card that pretends it's a floppy disk drive, so I can have 1,200 games, most of them terrible. That I do play though. I launch them. I enjoy them. I like seeing them and messing with them. I like making the hardware work is satisfying for me, kind of like some people tinker in a garage to make a car work. I sit around with computers. Making them run on modern monitors because old monitors are broken or expensive or don't survive being purchased, right? I mean, I actually drove from Texas to Arizona with a carload of computers because I didn't want them shipped. A bunch of Tandy computers from all the way from a TRS-80 Model 3 to a Tandy 2000. And because they don't ship well. So old hardware is... and the magnetic media is iffy. So, but I tinker with them, trying to get them to work. I'm fascinated by the fact that I can buy things. There's a whole hobby industry of people who will make specialty scalers to make sure you can. I just bought a $300 retro tinker for my wife for Christmas, as I say. No, it's a specialty auto scaler that will take a old 8-bit signal and will automatically scale it to the appropriate size to an HDMI out or a SCART. Which is a European connector that I just think is the bee's knees, but that's the kind of thing that makes me unpopular at parties. But other than that, I mean, the games got better. As I got into college, they actually started becoming better, but there was an internet, but there were a lot of like fake internet services like AOL, where games got played on America Online, and you would dial in. So that kind of limited you, but you were able to do the first time that software patching became a thing. You know, now they sell you fundamentally broken games all the time on Steam that you buy them and they're almost ready and you wait around for them to patch them each time. And I think that's an unfortunate part of the business, but I understand why they do what they do. Because I'm in a publishing business. You're only as good as the last thing you published, and you can only pay the bills while you have money coming in. And so you have to make trade-offs. I mean, everything you do in economics is a trade-off. It's like, am I going to buy X or am I going to buy Y? Am I going to spend money on this or am I spend money on that? Do I release now and potentially push off some of the buyers, knowing I'll sell a lot, versus do I fire everybody and go home? I mean, these decisions are made by lots of people, but what is done, that thinking has, I think, transformed the way you see independent game design. I've been playing a game. I'm embarrassed how many hours I've been playing it, called Vampire Survivors, and you guys may actually know that one. It's the #1 game on the Steam Deck right now, right? I play that. I have a pair of Rokid Air display glasses, XR glasses, and I lay in my bed with those connected to my Steam Deck with a Bluetooth controller flat on my back. I play a shit ton, pardon my language, of Vampire Survivors, and one of the key elements of that, it looks like an 8-bit game. It plays like an 8-bit or 16-bit game. Looks like a Nintendo, Super Nintendo, basically. But you could never do that on those computers because there's so many things on screen at once, right? You're seeing a renaissance in gameplay by independent game designers because you can patch things. You can go onto Steam and you have a distribution platform where everybody can see you if you bring attention to yourself. It's not easy at all. It's hard. I mean, writing games is hard. Getting noticed when you write games is probably even harder. I mean, I don't do a lot on, we have some products on Steam for a virtual tabletop, which is how you play Dungeons and Dragons online, right? But I don't think they sell that many there. But I can't imagine what it would take to go on to places, I don't know, Twitter, Facebook. I don't even know where you would go. It used to be Reset Era was a big one. They used to have a lot of bulletin board systems, but to bring attention to yourself, because you can now make games that are fundamentally 80% done or done, but could be better. And as an independent designer, you could make them, get money for them, and then put it back into it. I mean, what's the guy's name? The guy who made Minecraft fundamentally did that by himself originally until he sold out to Microsoft, ruined everything. But no, I mean, that's my background. I mean, you're not here for a history lesson for me, but that's the era I grew up in. And so when I collect old systems, I pick up old software. Where do I get it? Everywhere. You'd be amazed. Once somebody knows that you collect old computers, people don't want them in their house when somebody passes away or when, they get a divorce. Divorces have got me more stuff for Dungeons and Dragons and computers than anything I've ever seen. So that's no comment on marriage. My wife is a very, very understanding person, because I have this whole room. I don't know if you can see the rest of it, but I mean, that's all role-playing games. I have a whole nother building with it full of role-playing games. And then I have a whole 2 rooms full of vintage video games. Why do I do this? Because I have no good life. I enjoy the hell out of it. I live in an era where I can do and see the things that as a kid I thought were amazing. And you can appreciate, in my opinion, what you are able to do with vintage computers and video games is appreciate what is available now and criticize it without just being, hey man, that sucked. Well, why did it suck? How could you actually do better? What did people before you do with way limited hardware ability? What did they do with the tools they had to make a game that was actually compelling? And that's the kind of thing that I think for future game designers in video or tabletop, to be honest with you, the tabletop in some ways is easier, though it's a smaller market. I mean, if you want to ever make money at it, you got to be accidental like me. My history was with Kickstarter. Without Kickstarter, I would be still working for the state government in Arizona as a terrible, probably corrupt lackey, right? Because before I did this, my job was in politics. And I absolutely despised it. I'm lucky to be doing what I'm doing. But knowing the history of the video game market and knowing the history of what came behind you, knowing how some of these games worked, I think fundamentally do a lot for appreciating the resources that are available now and teaching you that because you can do something doesn't mean you should, right? You can do a million things. You have a ton of memory. You have video cards that can do things that literally couldn't believe even 5 years ago now, right? I mean, I have a flight cockpit and an Oculus. I collect VR systems too. Yeah, that's it. That's all I collect. After that, I barely collect clothes. I don't own a car. My wife does. She's a flight attendant. She leaves 4 days a week, and then I go in my little cave and I tinker and mess with stuff and go on to meetings and talk about dragons with people and worry incessantly about economics, right? But the VR headsets are a whole different thing, right? And they give you the ability to do things that have brand new challenges, but just because you can do stuff in VR, should you? I mean, you have a great concept for a game. Is it good in VR? Do you care? I mean, Vampire Survivors is the most fun I've had in hours of games. I'm VR games. I have Skyrim in VR. I'd rather play it on my Steam Deck. Not because it's not fun in VR, it is, but it's not designed for it. It came out before VR just because it could be there. Is it a great idea to buy it there? No, I don't think it is. I think that if you want to have that experience, yes. But to make it fun and compelling as it for an audience, no. My favorite game in VR is a game called Racket NX. And I like it because I get exercise. If you had told me I bought VR because I bought an Oculus when it first came out on Kickstarter. Right after the Kickstarter, I got what they call a DK2, a development kit. And I had to lie and tell them that I was a developer so I can get one. And that kind of actually got me into Facebook as a developer because when they purchased it. So I had the easy way in to trick myself into getting side loading, right? Which I think you can now do without that. But anyway, all these games and all the history of games and the collecting has taught me is that the platform that you work on tells you a lot about what you can do, and the more ability you have to do more and more things doesn't make a more compelling game or system at all. Like the Resident Evil on VR is awesome. The problem is I need a new pair of pants all the time. It can be so compellingly scary, it's almost hard to play. Right? You can do Alien Isolation was the scariest thing I ever did in my life in VR. It was horrifying in a way that was, if I had had a heart problem, it may have been dangerous. I'm not lying to you. I remember walking in, playing the game, and I walk into the door, open the door. I'm like, oh my God, there's this button. I push the button and the shower's on. I'm in the shower. But I'm so terrified what to do because of the music and the really confined space. You don't get a sense of the space and Unity until you walk in it, right? But then I remember I'm walking, I hear like kind of skittering. I'm like, what the? I look up, and I died. But you felt like you died. There was a Sword Art Online, right? Yeah, that's what it felt like because it was so terrifying. Those kind of games are really cool and compelling experiences, but they will never sell a lot of copies. And if you're interested in making really cool art, scare the F out of me. But if you want to sell a bunch of games, because games will sell mostly to people who, it will sell to young kids up to 18, 21 when they have a lot of disposable income and time, or people like me. And so you get to, those kinds of decisions you make based on that. We didn't have those options before, right? A scary game was the one that you got that you were worried was going to break your drive, right? Because you had bad media. That was scary. So, I don't know. I think it's probably better though. I mean, I could say a lot more, but I don't know how much is compelling. Do you have any questions, or is there anything, Jay, anything you want me to say?
You guys have any questions, go ahead and ask.
I can't quite hear you. Hold on.
I'm far away from this microphone. Go ahead.
I have a question
Okay.
specifically about piracy.
Sure.
If you found out today that one of your games on Frog God was getting pirated, what would you do?
Well, I can tell you right now, I assure you it's pirated. I know exactly where it's pirated at, and hopefully it's a promotional vehicle. I'm not going to stop it. There's not one. We have some people and some indie designers in our industry that wanted me to be part of a anti-piracy group. I'm like, all you're doing is offending potential customers. Most people who pirate, and this is true then and it's true now, don't really play the games. They pirate because it's kind of a compulsion. It's kind of like kleptomania. They may or may not play a game. I think piracy for movies is a much bigger problem for their income than games are. And for Frog God, the amount of time it would take to even write the letter to say, hey, take this down, is far less valuable to me than people seeing that we exist. Because being a third-party publisher in an industry that is completely dominated by one company, I mean, absolutely dominated. People have heard of Pathfinder and Paizo, and it's irrelevant. I mean, Wizards of the Coast makes, I have it. They make waffle irons with the Dungeons and Dragons logo, right?
In
So-
the grand scheme of things with piracy, it's just earned media rather than stolen goods.
I see piracy as an unfortunate look. The piracy that I'm getting from our stuff is all digital PDFs that I do sell. A lot of my customers have come from the fact they've been given a PDF, given one from a friend, or they've got it off a server. People do show up. People who steal digital copies that don't use them fundamentally haven't cost me a dime. I mean, to me, it's pragmatism. But I don't make Skyrim, right? So,
I have a question.
sure.
What is your favorite personal home computer?
What's your favorite cookie? That's a hard question, man. Home computer.
I know it's different because like
Like what era? Help me.
some games are different on different computers and stuff. But
Right now, it's a Steam Deck. I'll be flat with you. Right now, it's a Steam Deck because I can use it anywhere and it works well with these XR glasses, and it's convenient. My favorite computer to actually play like vintage games on by far is an IBM 5150. It's a PC, for a small PC, MS-DOS machine, because I have it set up with the cottage industry of hardware people have made a disk drive that you use a USB stick that it emulates a disk drive, right?
oh, is it like an extra drive?
Hmm?
It's like an EverDrive, you're loading an SD card onto it.
It's sort of like it's sort of like that, yeah. But the one for the PC works on an ISA bus.
Does that, so in order to run the games, is it a disk image or?
No, it's an absolute disk image, yes.
Yeah,
So you
okay.
actually go in and you type in the MS-DOS, which is one of the challenges of doing that I do is always having to remember which computer needs which command. That's why I have the internet, so I don't have to remember. No, but other ones I like, as far as consoles go, I absolutely love the Sega Saturn. I don't know why. But like, you ever use I use Ambernick makes a bunch of handheld emulation devices. I use that a lot, mostly for arcade games. But I just ordered this is an emulation system. It's a Commodore 64 done in chips. I use that while I work. This is my main work machine, but I have a secondary monitor, so I will run RPG games in the background. So if I decide to get a Coke or anything, I will go do an encounter so I don't go crazy because I can work for 14 hours a day on the Frog God stuff. Not that it feels like work all the time. It's like, well, more halflings is not really a order to, I don't feel like my people hate me as a boss. I demand more green skinned goblins, less gray skinned goblins is not my people are good people. And so I do a lot of work, but I don't mind doing it. So, but it does keep me from going crazy to being in Excel. Anything else?
Yeah,
I'm an old person. I have a long knowledge. Yeah, go ahead.
a bit game like Vampire Survivors,
Mm-hmm.
would have been possible for that to be like developed back like on the Ataris.
Not a chance.
No.
Think about how things are on screen. You got to remember that sometimes, like Commodore 64, I think could have two sprites on it at once, and those were the movable pixels. It looks like an old game. It's not. Now it's based on fundamentally old game stuff, like a Rogue. They call it Rogue style, right? Well, those games came out in 1981. They ran on PDP-10s, which are old mini computers at universities, right? Like multi-user dungeon stuff was before there were graphics or the kind of thing. Those things happened. It would not be possible. Even thinking that way wasn't possible. But it is very much the descendant of those games, which is why I like it. I mean, it looks like Castlevania, man. That's music to my ears. Anybody else? Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just got you to pass it today. When you work on my guests.
I'm trying to. So you said you have the Steam Deck. When that initially launched, what were your thoughts on that? Because it kind of like it has a really good price to performance ratio, where the more you spend, the more I wouldn't say performance.
Everything has that.
Yeah.
I'm living proof that one of my cardinal rules of purchasing any electronics is go as high as you can afford, honestly, because if you're going to do it, I'm in a position in my life where I can afford expensive hardware, so it's easy for me to say, right? The Steam Deck, Valve is one of the few companies I still like. Okay, Valve is the Valve Index is a very wonderful piece of VR equipment. Now, Oculus has done a better job because it's mobile, but that's going to change, I think, real soon. But the Steam Deck is, to me, when I bought it and took it home, I'm like, well, I was disappointed that, you can't play all your games, but I knew why. You had a fantasy that, I'm going to be playing. I can't wait to play this Homeworld or some kind of game. I don't know how familiar are the older games, but I love strategy games. Strategy games are much harder to do on a Steam Deck easily, though I can do it with a keyboard. But that's not the first handheld PC I've had. I owned an Aya Neo.
Yeah.
And that's a full PC. And I was on an airplane with a Bluetooth keyboard and stupid XR glasses with the Aya Neo, and I could play Dune Spice War on it. It was fun, right? It was cool. But it isn't as good as the Steam Deck. The Valve, they hate Microsoft, right? A lot. Gabe Newell hates them, and he would love to do anything to have an operating system that replaces it. This is the first time I believe that's possible. I believe that the Steam Deck is likely for many people to replace a home mini PC because it does all the same things. Nobody cares about operating systems anymore, right? Microsoft doesn't really charge for it that much anymore. But the Steam Deck is a gateway to use Linux on your home TV, right? And so this is, I think they have big plans for it, and it's going to do a lot. I bought one for my nephew for Christmas. Now, I didn't get the nice one like I bought, but he got a pretty nice one. Because I think that fundamentally, it gives you the opportunity to do more things. A Steam Deck hooked with using the desktop stuff, or even, let me step back. One of the things that was great about learning how to use PCs when I did is I actually learned a lot about PCs. It got me my first job my first real job was a Microsoft technical support for Windows NT Workstation. I got that job because I knew how to go into and work with AutoExec files and how to write scripts because I want to play games. That hasn't been possible for a long time because you just play games. The Steam Deck's going to allow you to work with things like how to get Windows on it because I want to use it for school. How do I do this? What can I do with modding? Because modding is the only thing left that I think teaches game fundamentals you do at home before you're looking to have a class in this. I couldn't imagine doing that, right? But you are all here because you've done those things. You all know what modding is. You all modded Skyrim. You all know what Curse is, right? And that has given you the tools to see how you can change and manipulate games. The Steam Deck's making that still possible. I guarantee you the Nintendo Switch will never let you do that. And the Nintendo Switch is a fine machine that I hate, right? I own it. I have it. I play pinball on it because I can, not because it's any good. It's a great system. It's great for kids, great for families, it has all kinds of advantages, but it's not for me. And I suspect for you guys to play games is for you, but a Steam Deck would do you guys a lot better good because you can do so many more things with it. They trust the consumer in a way Nintendo never will. And I think that's one of the things that to me is attractive about the old systems is they trusted consumers because they had no way to lock them out. They had no choice, right? Everything was open.
Nintendo just doesn't care about their customer base. They just
They
don't
care very much as you have money.
Well, that's true, but they just don't understand how the internet works. I mean, I think I recently saw they shut down a Super Smash Brothers event.
They previously authorized.
They've done that multiple times.
They've
They've
done
always been that way. And so, yes, you're right. Because you remember Nintendo, things are really, Japan is when they say foreign country, Japan is the foreign country to us. I mean, it is a very different culture. And they have a very different attitude towards these things. And it was never going to have the same kind of open spirit, I think, that you see that we have with digital stuff. I mean, the United States and Canada are both very Western and very much, at least until recently, very much in the individual spirit, right? We could all do things and we didn't need government to tell us what to do, right? Japan's a very different country because for lots of reasons. I don't want to go into it, but they're based on rice farming. Everybody dies if you don't farm rice, right? And so they're very collective. And so they believed in making sure that they were rewarded and they controlled what they made in a way that we don't. And so Nintendo makes a fine product for people who want one. That's how I'll say it. Anything else? I feel like I'm just talking about things that aren't fundamentally going to help you, but I mean, if you want to know a little bit about like Frog God, people often ask us if will we make a video game? The answer is no. And how come you don't license your stuff for video games? Because it's fundamentally, there's no value to it to the people writing video games. I would give it away, honestly. If someone said they want to write a video game based on our content, I would let them do it for the smallest of fees. Like it would be like basically a moonshot fee, meaning in a contract, we have a moonshot clause. It means that if you sell 1 million units, we want a huge chunk. But other than that, I would take 5 cents on a sale. Just because I want people to see our IP and independent software stuff, I think is a way for people to see it. But we at Frog God, we have 6 partners, right? And we pay 42 people a year in PayPal. That's how many 1099s we write. None of us are capable of running a software project. All right, that's my mom who's calling now, who I won't talk to either. Anyway, fundamentally not able to run a software project. So I think that in the end, you do what you're good at, right? And you guys want to do digital software and you want to make games, I'm assuming mostly games for modern PCs. And modern PCs do many things really well, but none of us who ever work at Frog God are any good at it. We are good at what we do, or could we get better? Yeah, but fundamentally, we make tabletop games and books. One of the things I do is I worry about the binding and the page counts of books, which is not quite the same thing. But yeah, any other questions?
You said, oh, okay, yeah, sorry, never mind.
All right, Zach, thank you very much for coming on and talking to our students.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep, no problem. You guys have a great day. If there's any questions about this stuff, he can give you my email address. I'm slow to answer, but I do answer. If you have questions about the role-playing game industry itself and what I do, or God forbid you want to write a role-playing game module, I'm the guy you could ask, and sure that your professor can tell you too. But I'm happy to share that stuff. And if anybody really wants to hear about this stuff, I'm available for that too. So anyway, thanks a lot for the opportunity. No one ever wants to talk about this stuff because I'm boring. So thanks for the opportunity to bore you guys. You have a great one. Thanks, guys.
Take care.